bottom rung of the creative totem pole. People don't have all that much respect for comic books, by and large. I think that's unfair, because I think you have to consider everything by itself. There are good comic books, there are bad comic books. There are good movies, bad movies. There are good novels, bad novels. And I've always thought, suppose Shakespeare and Michelangelo were alive today. And suppose Shakespeare, and they met, and Shakespeare said, "Hey, Mike, how'd you like to collaborate on a comic book with me? I'll write it, you draw it." And Michelangelo said, "Oh, yeah, sure, that's a great idea." Now, could you imagine if Shakespeare wrote a comic book and Michelangelo illustrated it? Can you imagine anybody saying, it's just a comic book, why bother with that? My point being, it all depends on who does it and how it's done. And a great comic book can be better than a mediocre motion picture or television show, and vice versa. So I don't think it's fair to look down your nose at any form of the media or entertainment. It all depends on how it's done. Even though I personally am not as involved in comics as I used to be, I love comic books. And so many times people say to me, well, do you think they have any future? I mean, we have movies and we have video games and there's computers and television. I think there'll always be comics. Oh, sure, they have to compete with all these other forms of entertainment. But there's something so nice about a comic book. It's the only way I can put it. Because you have pictures, you have action, you can see the characters, you can read what they're saying, you can enjoy the story at your own speed. You can look at it slowly and really treasure every illustration. You can read it quickly. You can go back and reread it a dozen times. You can kind of fold it up, put it in your pocket, walk down the street, meet a friend, and show it to your friend, and you look at it together. You share the fun. And you have color, and comics cost a lot more now than when I first got into the field, but still, compared to other forms of entertainment, they're still about the cheapest form you can find. So, by and large, while they may never be as big as they were, I think there will always be comics, and especially young people love them. And as they start developing a taste for reading comics, they usually keep that as they go through life. When I write a story, I am that character while I'm writing the story. I find it's the only way you can do it properly. For example, whenever I would be writing a comic years ago, my wife would usually pass by and say, "Who are you talking to?" And I would realize I was talking out loud, "Take that, you rat," or "You can't get away with that," or "Look out, help, watch out." Whatever it was, well, I didn't say it that loud, but I'd be kind of mumbling to myself to get the feeling of the dialogue and to see if it rang true, if it sounded authentic and believable. And I would be whichever character I was writing at the moment, whoever's dialogue I was writing, I'd be that character. So I'd sometimes be sitting and writing, "Me Hulk, me strongest one." I felt like an idiot, I guess, when I think about it later. But, oh yeah, I don't see how any writer can write any type of story the way it should be done unless he or she does not feel as though they are that character at the moment. You have to get into that character's shoes, so to speak. I've really been lucky in one area. I've never had writer's block. There are so many ideas floating around for stories, and it's so easy, really, to come up with ideas for stories. All you have to do, at least in my case, I let the story come out of the character himself or herself. I try to think, if I were that character, what would be my biggest worry? What would be the worst thing that could happen to me? Then I try to write something bad happening to the character. Then I try to think, who would be the most horrible person for that character to have to go up against, some antagonist? And why would that enemy be the worst kind? What one weakness or vulnerability does my hero have that this enemy could strike against? And you sort of just keep thinking that way and put them together. Once I have the elements of the plot, the dialogue, that's the most fun. I love writing dialogue. That's never a problem. Especially, I've always been very lucky because the way I would work with artists, I would give them the bare bones of the plot. The artist would then draw the story, bring it back to me, and I would put in the dialogue and the captions while looking at the illustrations. So it was such fun. I'd see a picture of a guy like this. Well, I knew darn well I had to write, yow, or help, or something. You can tell what to write by looking at the picture, you know, and that makes it fun. So I think overall, writing a comic strip the way I had done them